Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today we have our lovely guest, Amy, the ESTJ, and she's going to tell us about the ESTJ personality. She has a Twitter account that I'll link below, and I can't wait to talk to you, Amy. So without further ado, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Amy Pluth. I've been into type for about 3 years. I had attended a workshop by an HR professional who was explaining some of it. And I came away from it going, okay, that's good stuff. And I read the description of myself, which was an ESTJ, but I was like, oh, okay, this doesn't quite feel right. So I went exploring and I found cognitive functions. And then I found articles that explained my husband, who's an INFP, FINE user. And it just sent me down a rabbit hole of information that I just devoured of things. So from there, my interests have wandered into lots of different areas, and I've gobbled up most of the free content, or a good bit of the free content out there. So, and then it's been very fascinating being a rarity in this circle of not your typical type for enjoying all this stuff. And I have to admit, I'm a rarity in my family too, because nobody else really is into it in my circles that I know here in real life. So, and then I'm been married to my husband for 14 years. We have 4 children. So they are great fun, and it's fun to watch their personalities develop and try to think of applicable uses for type without overdoing it. And, but yeah, I really enjoy it.
I'm really glad to have you on. It's really nice to have sensors on because they care about like the practical application of the theory, and it's refreshing to like learn about that. Sensors are like a rarity in this space. You're basically a celebrity in any Hangout or like Zoom call or any like MBTI space or a Jungian space, because like everyone wants to crowd around the sensor and go like, what's your experience like? And then jab, and then learn more about you. So yeah, it's nice to have you on here, Amy. And so my first question for you is, what are 3 words you would describe yourself as?
Outgoing, open book, friendly.
And so what are 3 words people would describe ESTJs as, or you would describe ESTJs as?
Measuring metrics, remembering what's happened before, getting things done.
Nicely put. And what are 3 words people would describe you as?
Other people would say me as very outgoing. That would still be a description of me. Happy, controlling.
Yeah, when you control things, it ensures for like the best results. So that's a good thing.
That's my way of ensuring the best results. I wouldn't say it always gets the best results, but it's my way of getting the best results.
For sure. And so what are some core features of ESTJs?
ESTJs are interested in getting things done. Now, our definition of what needs to get done does vary person by person based on our interests and preferences. But it's always probably includes an element of literally getting tasks done, and how we get tasks done is going to be very similar. It's going to be as no nonsense as we can get it. It's going to be utilizing other people as much as we can. I think that we appreciate those who are better than us, but we're also willing to train those who are not as good as us. We're also totally willing to learn from those who are better than us. I think the other flip side of it, as SI users, we do like to remember what has and hasn't worked, and we use that information to extrapolate new paths forward. Like if I am cooking, I'm going and I remember, oh, this trick worked for a different recipe, but this recipe is kind of similar. I'm going to try this trick here. I also think that applies to other situations. Like I had an evaluation this summer, and my boss said, "Hey, you've been annoying people," and I said, "Okay, how?" And she's like, "Well, just don't tell them that you know more than them." And I'm like, how? Which conversation? which email. I promise in this case, I will not tell them that you told me, but I need you to tell me exactly which conversation we had so that I can figure out how not to do that again. Because if you just leave this in a realm of, hey, don't tell your boss what to do, which part of not tell my boss? Like, there are certain facts I know. Like, am I not supposed to tell them any facts I know? Or, I don't extrapolate well without a concrete illustration. Once I have one of those, I can extrapolate pretty well from there.
Yes. So when giving you guidelines on how to act more tactfully, you need to have like a concrete example of how to act more
A script
tactfully.
is actually quite helpful.
Lovely. So all you FE users out there, Amy wants your script.
Yes, I do. If you're willing to take the time to say, hey, this is what makes it better, smoother, faster, happier, we can acknowledge those, but it does also help if you give those kind of reasons to us. Like, we will take a feeling-based reason as being valid if you'll just bother to tell us that's the reason why you want us to do something.
Definitely. And so any other core features of ESTJs?
When we work, we like to work hard and fast and get it done.
Yeah, you guys are masters at getting it done in the most optimal way. And so any other core features?
I'd say we're pretty devoted to our circles, whatever they are, whether they're the circles we grew up with that we're still happy with or the new ones we've chosen as adults. We have a tendency to be pretty devoted to those. And I would say we are defenders of what should be defended. My husband laughed. I was filling out the questionnaire you sent me after the last panel. And I said, okay, I just want you to look this over, make sure. He goes, yeah. He goes, but that last phrase you put in there is totally you. Because I had written, I will weep with those who legitimately weep and tell the rest to knock it off. And he goes, that's you. And I think we have that reaction to a lot of things. If we perceive it as a real thing, we're going to help it, fix it. We can show empathy for it. But if we evaluate that as being a not okay, then we're just going to tell you or leave it alone or not help out.
Yeah. So it's like is that emotion like valid for you to be feeling, or is it like being used as a like in unnecessarily or used like in a weak way, or is
Well,
it like
you can be, small children are immature and we do have grace for that, but we also want to teach them that, hey, there is a better way. If you have if you're hurt, we're sad for you. If you are, if you're angry and you tell us the reason and we agree with the reason, we'll probably be angry with you. So like emotions are valid. Like, we wouldn't say emotions are invalid. We're not emotionless creatures by any means. We're just not willing to accept just because you have an emotion that it's a valid one. We're going to analyze whether or not we thought that you were valid in having that emotion, or whether or not you were being immature, for lack of a better way to put it, or you were just wrong. So
yeah, that really helps children become more self-sufficient, like what you mentioned before. So that's a good mentality to have. And so any other core features you notice?
we like to say it as it is. We're pretty blunt and we appreciate blunt back. And we enjoy giving out criticism, but that's because we want you to be at your best. And so if you can criticize us back in a constructive criticism action, and believe me, we do know the difference between constructive and just plain, criticism. We love that. It's easy for us to forget when we're criticizing people to help them understand we're trying to be constructive. Now, there's all sorts of bad versions of this out there, depending on your experience and things that have happened to you and whether or not you've been taught how to do constructive criticism versus just, it wasn't the way I did it, therefore it's wrong. And so those are all lessons that have to be learned, you know. Um, but those are just things that every person has to learn to some degree. The question is just which side of the coin you land on.
It ties back to the point you told me about before, which was you guys dish out blunt easily, so you can take blunt more easily as well.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, but we do appreciate blunt being delivered the same way we deliver it, which is fairly emotionless. If you're delivering your constructive criticism, but you're amped up crying, or some of us take it yelling. If we're yellers, we can probably take it yelling. If we are not yellers and you yell your criticism at it, that's very distracting to us because it's not being delivered the same way we deliver it. So that is one thing you could figure out is which way does your ESTJ deliver criticism? Do they deliver it, with emotions, without emotions? Is it sent in a way that critiques the action or critiques the person? Because usually we mean criticism in this specific action can be improved, whether it's just simply, hey, I'm going to teach you a faster way to fold clothes, and not that we hate the way you folded clothes before. We appreciate the fact you folded clothes before, but this is a faster way. Or otherwise, that can be a good way to help us, evaluate so that we're not blowing up back you. Because if we think you're criticizing us with no basis or just out of your emotions, we're probably going to shut down or we're going to come back at you because we're not going to accept and just ignore the fact somebody critiqued us that we don't agree with. Like if we don't agree with your critique, we're going to let you know, and we may change our mind, we may not. The other thing I should say is if we're in the middle of doing a task and you want to critique the task, depending on how long your explanation is, depends on whether or not we want that information during the task or after task is done. Like my kids, I'll be like doing something and they say, "Mommy," and I'm like, "Yes." And I'm kind of pausing my work to listen to them. And then they start thinking before they spit out whatever it was they're going to say. And that drives me up a wall because I'm like, I paused what I was doing so I could acknowledge you, and you are not ready to talk. But I could see that also applying to your explanation. You are talking, but your explanation is far too long for the time I have right now to deal with that. So I need you to either talk to me later or shorten that up, please.
It's true. Yeah. It's like sometimes the ways that people do things are inefficient to your plan of doing things. It gets in the way of
Mhm.
getting things done
Yeah.
the way you wanted.
And I wouldn't say that all ESTJs we have to get everything done a week ahead of time. There, there is some who like that, and there are certain things I like that way. But I'm also the type that plans, hey, everybody's walking out the door at 5:30, and I've put things off until the hour before, but that's because I know exactly how long they're going to take. So if you come along and you start flubbing that plan, and then you make me late because you flubbed in my plan, I'm going to be very frustrated with you. So don't, you know, just because someone says they do things at the last minute, it's not the same last minute other people are talking about. This is a planned last minute of execution, which I think is a good way to tell the difference between a TE user, EST user versus a classic perceiver definition or something like that. Is we might both be late, but you ought to ask us why. But is it because we had a plan and something screwed up the plan, or was it because we didn't have a plan and you know that is the case? And I'm not just talking about being on time. I'm talking about any project type thing. So
Yeah, it's like TE will have like this maximized plan in the way that they want it structured, and if you like throw something in it and then it gets like diverted or it gets like thrown off, then if you were late, it would be because someone ruined your plan or like got in the way of it,
Hmm.
or something unexpected happened,
Hmm.
rather than a perceiver just not having a plan fleshed out to begin with.
Yes. And I do think, I mean, and there are tasks that are, we know this task is going to require flexibility.
Mhm.
Like, and if it's a task that requires flexibility, some of us feel more comfortable with it than others, but there are some of us who actually do really well with jobs that require flexibility or split section, split second on the job decisions of change of plans. Um, you can have the greatest lesson plans in the world as a teacher, but if your class doesn't understand something or somebody gets unruly or whatever, you have to adjust on the fly to to get the lesson across. And some of us are very good at that, of adjusting on the fly, but and being very flexible. But usually that's in a job where we know that's a required element of the job. You know, uh, y- they some jobs just require that level of flexibility, and you can find these TJs doing that, and they seem very flexible. But that's because this particular element is planned to be flexible, and you know that there's going to be bumps and hiccups. And this is where having SI is actually great help, because if you know you need to be flexible and you're running into roadblocks, or problems are coming up, we can rely on that sense of, hey, I've hit this roadblock before. You won't even realize I hit a roadblock because I remembered how this worked last time, and I'm going to do this. We're going to sail right past this without a problem because I'm going to remember. And it doesn't, how quickly you can remember instances in the past that apply to the moment, that is dependent to the different levels or ages and capabilities of ESTJs. But we use those memories that way to smooth things out very quickly.
Yeah, so it's like judges can be flexible, but they plan that flexibility, like they plan to be adaptable because they know it's required.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Amy. And so any other core features?
I think for any ESTJ, if you present them with something to do, or ask them an opinion, they're going to have something, they're going to come up with an answer right then. You present them with a task, we'll dive in and we'll start doing it. We don't necessarily take a lot of time to prep ahead of time for doing that. um, Now if it doesn't go well, we're going to prep before the next time we repeat this activity. um, I was talking with you before we started this. I said, you gave me a list of questions and I completely did not read them. And that was slightly intentional because that is realistic. But if we were to come back and do this again next week, I would have sat here percolating the whole time going, oh, that didn't sound good. And that part wasn't great. And what's a better way to phrase this? And so I think as I do more panels and more stuff like this, my presentation will become a lot smoother, but it comes from experience. And there's the experience of learning from your own mistakes. I think ESTJs are also really good at watching other people. Like, there's two different kids, my mom said, when they're little. There's the kid that has to push the button themselves to learn that that makes the copy machine work. And then there's the other kid who watches the first kid push the button on the copy machine and they go, oh, that button makes the copy machine work. Dennis the Menace is the classic he must do it himself learner. That's why he gets into so many scrapes. He's got to do it himself to learn that this is how it works. There are other children for whom they can watch somebody else learn and it's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Or I am doing that. That worked for somebody else. And ESTJs, while experience can, doing it ourselves is a valuable teacher, we're also, I think, a lot more open to, hey, we watched somebody else do it. That worked for them. I'll try and duplicate that myself.
That's a really good point, Amy, about like how ESTJs, like if it's repeatable and it works and they'll likely take it on if they like the way that you do it. Excellent points of wisdom. And so my next question for you is, what are some things people misunderstand about ESTJs?
That we have to be loud. We often are, but we don't have to be loud. We don't have to be angry. That would be very common, I think, for us. I think a lot of descriptions have us as being, you know, swearers. You can find some who are not, you know. Sometimes they think we don't care about emotions, and we do. We just don't necessarily care about them the same way you do. I think they don't always understand that we prefer to be blunt, you know, don't mind blunt, don't mind critique. Giving out critique can be a form of love, you know, in the sense of we just want you to be better, you know, and so we love a good critique. We thought you did too. Takes us sometimes a while to mature enough to realize that's not the case. I think that our work mode does not necessarily reflect our out of work mode. Work mode's usually pretty same across all STJs, very get the job done. But I think there are some people for whom, you know, after work, they're going to present differently and they might seem more like a different type on their when they're relaxing. I think that traditional depends on the way you define it, can be accurate. Traditional in a sense of we're going to repeat things that work, yes. Traditional in the sense of whatever you consider cultural traditions to be, not necessarily. I think it depends on whether or not you enjoy the group you culture you grew up in and what other cultures you've been exposed to. I think sometimes people think we'll never change, and I don't find that to be the case. We just may not change the way you expect us to. I think we actually change pretty quickly once we're actually convinced of that we were wrong. You know, but if you don't bother presenting information as to why we were wrong, we're not going to change because we don't see the point. I think because we're not the extrapolators or necessarily as contemplative as other types, you can't just kind of hint at us that this is the case. You know, you need to just straight out say, hey, this is wrong, and then let us extrapolate from there. I think that's a pretty good list for right now.
Very well put list, Amy. Yeah, A+ points. And so my next question for you is, how do your functions show up in your life, starting with TE?
TE shows up in work mode. Like when I am getting chores done, when I am getting ready, I'm going to optimize. Personal Hacker uses the term measuring metrics, and I think that's a really good way to put it. To manage everything to keep the group together are all very important to me. TE wants everybody to have consensus on things. So with our personality, we often consider the easiest way to get consensus is to convince everybody else to do it our way. And sometimes that's gentle, sometimes it's not so gentle in our presentation of do it my way. We appreciate a true artist of their craft, but we're also pretty interested in the basics and getting the basics applicable to everybody so everybody can become basically capable or moderately capable of doing things. TE also means I have my emotions and I like my emotions, I don't mind your emotions, but your emotions aren't necessarily going to dictate a change in my emotions. Just because you have emotions. The reason why you have your emotions, that may dictate a change in my emotional frame. Because of that, I think that enables me to keep my cool when I'm faced with some instances of highly charged emotions. I can ignore the emotions. I can focus on the things that are going on and the underlying causes to those. I think it makes us practical, not wasteful in a lot of areas. I hate wasting time. I hate wasting resources. Recycling is appealing as long as you don't make the rules too onerous about things. And there are some levels of recycling. I'm like, dude, can't we just be a little bit more environmentally friendly here? Like this doesn't strike me as that hard of a thing to get everybody on board with. If it would make it easier on the recycling systems, why can't I have 3 cans for recycling as opposed to 1? If sorting it is so incredibly difficult for the system, I could pre-sort some of this ahead of time. It wouldn't be that hard. Um, and then that's TE. SI, I happen to have a pretty good memory for specific details. It's a lot higher than average. That's just the way I'm wired, but that definitely helps me on the side of I remember what has happened. I can predict if, based on the current situation, if it's similar or not, what the results would be if I tried the same thing. If I didn't like my results last time, depending on how close my results were, it may just be a minor tweak. It may be throwing that baby out with the bathwater and trying something totally new. SI likes things comfortable. What makes it comfortable for me? Sometimes what makes me comfortable is what makes you comfortable. Because we do value other people, our loved ones, or other purposes. So we'll put aside what may seem like our comfort zone to get those done. SI is inside my mind. It's pretty categorized as far as different things, but they're all very concrete things as far as how that goes. I would say between the two, I like the idea of replicators. Like if I, there's a TV show, Stargate SG-1, and one of their enemies are replicators. They're like little robots that they gobble, basic things, and the mothers basically make all these little pieces that all join together, and they form identical little things, and they're trying to take over everything. And Borg replicators too would be similar in the sense of we want to create replicators to some degree of everybody else, whatever we consider to be a basic competency. We can't help it. We want to tell other people about it and inform and teach what we can and pass on knowledge. I think it's very hard for an ESTJ to keep their opinions to themselves unless they've been learning to keep their opinions to themselves and their processes to themselves. We're not this is my process and I'm not going to share this with you, type people as a general rule of thumb. ME comes down to I like to think through potentials. I do like to talk about abstract things. I think that is part of why I enjoy MBTI. But for me, abstracts lead back to the concrete world. Like I can think abstractly for a while, but I'm going to bring it back to applications in the concrete world at some point. I have thought about ways to overhaul, political systems. I've thought about ways to overhaul, things at home. Some of those are very, abstract, but then they come around to, okay, so how would you actually do it? That's the theory. Now let's, how do we actually get back here? FI is appreciation for Standing on my own personal values. Every ESTJ does have a different set of personal core values. They do have feelings attached to them. We are often willing to accept the core values of somebody else. That's very important to us. Not everybody, but a few people that we judge worthy of. And so we'll accept their core values as our own. And sometimes those core values that make me different from other people are logical, and sometimes they're not. And so learning to recognize when you have areas that aren't particularly logical, but they're still a core value to you is important, I think, as an ESTJ to learn that. And I think once you've learned to appreciate that, it's a lot easier when somebody else tells you, hey, this is just my core value. And it's easier to accept other people's what may seem like non-logical responses to you.
That was really well explained, Amy. Bravo. You really understand, you really understand the inside of your mind really well. So thank you for articulating that for everyone. And so my next question for you is, what are some famous ESTJs that you know about? I know during the ESTJ panel you mentioned some of them. You can also re-mention them here
Sure.
too, and if you remember any others.
I think Mary Poppins is an ESTJ. Hermione Granger, the girl from Ratatouille. She's, she took the time to really explain everything to him, got all those pieces in, and then she admitted to not being particularly creative herself, and there are times we do feel not particularly creative. Sometimes I think we synthesize better than we create things out of whole cloth, but we can be very good at synthesizing things. Other ESTJs. I've not really studied live people as ESTJs. That's just not something I've particularly gotten into. I'm not particularly good at looking at other people and immediately figuring out what personality type they are. For me to figure out your personality type, I literally have to teach you what I know and walk you through it. And then as I'm watching your reactions and your learning, then we can come up with the answer. So that's not an easy skill of mine. I think in one sense, feelers and intuitives have a easier time typing people instinctively than ESTJs do. And that can be, I think, one of the reasons why ESTJs sometimes have a harder time really getting to the wider scope of this as a practice, because I feel like I have a lot of head knowledge, but when I can't sit here and type anybody the way somebody who's had far less experience than me, but far less knowledge than me, but has a different type, it's frustrating, to be honest. And I do okay with obvious single focus traits, or certain maybe traits together. I can respond to, oh, you are definitely, you are empathetically crying because somebody else in the room is crying. I can recognize that. I can deal with that. You have to, you're out there, gathering new information. You're SE, I can see that part of it, but I can't necessarily see the rest of it. Classic definitions of introvert and extrovert, I can see those and I can adjust to those, but I tend to adjust more to individual pieces of different information I've learned rather than necessarily looking at somebody and going, oh, this is what you are. Now, I do catalog all those pieces. I do notice. So if I start seeing a repeating pattern of you're continually using this function, then I will get to the point where I assume that it's safe to always use that function back at you. It's hard. I wouldn't say we guess well what other people are,
Yeah, I guess it might be a facet of intuitives make more assumptions and like leaps of faith, like without having like adequate concrete evidence yet. So they're more likely to like jump to inferences. Like I think intuitives are more comfortable with large inferences, whereas like maybe being a more like sensory type, you need to actually see it like repeatedly to know, like to be grounded in your observation of them, whereas intuitives are just like, woo, it's this.
Well, I think also intuitives, they do gather concrete information, but it runs as a background process.
Mm-hmm.
Is the best description I've ever heard of it. And when it runs as a background process where you learn to, and you're always making hunches, you probably make a lot more than I do. So you've learned to
Yeah.
filter out which of your hunches are ridiculous and which ones are more on track. Because I don't practice making hunches all that often, I haven't refined that skill of making a hunch and getting it right. I have refined the skill of, hey, we've tried this before. Let's do a slight variation on this again, and we'll get predictable results. And so I think that may be the bigger difference between that is, um, I don't. I view my spitballing as spitballing. So, um, as opposed to the greatest guesswork ever. To be its guesswork, not necessarily a prediction, maybe.
That was fantastic, Amy. Yeah, as an intuitive, like the concrete like sensations that we gather are almost like a background process to the forefront of our mind, which is actually like the patterns that we're trying to decipher. So it's almost like the sensory is like a grain of salt, and what's real to us is that initial like the like it's like impressions that like the overall holistic feel we get from it is more at the forefront than, and the sensory is a background process.
Yeah, I've always likened it to the people who used to say they could feel there was a change in the weather. What they didn't realize was they felt the pressure drop. They noticed that trees and bushes were starting to shake. Um, they know they've tracked. It's funny. I went to college in Pensacola, and they got hit by a hurricane this year, on the same day of the year that I got hit with a hurricane when I was in Pensacola in college in Pensacola, like 16, 17 years ago. And so my mom's like, what are the chances that Pensacola to get hit by a hurricane, on the same day? I'm like, well, it's hurricane season. Weather patterns are somewhat predictable. It doesn't strike me as all that weird. But I think sometimes for intuitives, they have that same basis of they've gathered a lot of thoughts and things, but they don't keep those at the forefront of their brain. And so they don't realize how many real facts they're using as to come up with the answer. But they've gotten to the point where they trust what their answer is because it has been proven right often enough that they don't realize how much they're picking up in the background. And if you ask them to go back and say, hey, what were the concrete things you used to predict that? Depending on their personal training, they may not be able to identify them. Or they may be able to identify them, but it takes a lot of work for them to work backwards through all those things that clued them in as to what the answer was. Where I think for a sensor of either type is far more likely to know exactly what the clues were that led them to the answer.
That is incredibly insightful. That is so
That's
so
totally
so
robbed
smart.
from stuff I've read other places, which also tells you I'm a sensor because I didn't come up with it myself. I just read it somewhere, but that takeaway worked for me to learn to understand things.
Very very great takeaway. And so my next question for you is, what advice would you give to ESTJs watching this, or to your younger self?
You will find areas that you are not good at, and it's okay. I find sometimes I peter out in areas of expertise, like I'm trying to learn something and I'll give it a good go. But if I keep still banging my head against the wall after a while, it's probably worth just moving on and just admitting that maybe this job isn't right for you. Maybe this, skill is not really your forte, and it's okay to move on. I think it's important to learn when to give criticism and how to take criticism. I think it's important to learn to realize feelings are valid. Sometimes that's a bit of a learning curve for us. That I think it's important to learn that there are things that don't make sense to us that are valid and that are important. And learning to figure this out for yourself, which ones are important to you. Learning to control how you say what you say is an important skill. There are simple things that will make your message come across more pleasantly to other people, so they want to do that. Intuitives are great fun. You'll have to figure out whether or not that's something that works for you or how many of them you really want in your life. I like my intuitive. I'm not really saying I want to be responsible for a whole bunch of other ones because one keeps my hands full. So, and you may decide that dealing with them is not your cup of tea at all, and that's okay. I think it's important to learn about how to deal with other people because you don't have a choice about some people in your life. You don't always have a choice about the work you have to do while you're at a particular job. So learning how to deal with that and making good choices along the way is good. Don't be surprised if your grades are not as good in college as they were in high school. High school and elementary are far more geared to the way our minds work than necessarily college is. So college may not be you may have been a grade A, B student in high school, and you may get more, I didn't get any C's until college for a class. And fortunately, I had somebody tell me, that's not uncommon for that to happen. They didn't mean it for sensors in general, but I found that to be the case for me. So depending on what your major is, you may have a difference there. If you're not a business-minded, like as in, okay, I won't say I'm business-minded. I will say I love people, and that's can sometimes come across as different for an ESTJ, and it's okay to be that way. I think that'd be a lot of the advice I give.
Stellar advice, Amy. So that's going to help a lot of people. And so thank you, Amy, for coming on and sharing your wisdom about the ESTJ personality. Your incredible well of insight into the theory is really beneficial for the people watching this who either have an ESTJ in their life or they are an ESTJ, or like it's so practical, it's so applicable, it's said in such a way that is so digestible. You say it so clearly, and I'm so grateful for your ability to articulate these insights into the ESTJ mind. And I really appreciate your presence in the type community. You really help represent ESTJs because there's not many in the community. So you're like a big voice that helps people see this personality more accurately because they're able to know you and then they're able to calibrate off of that. So thank you for being a good like ESTJ for the community to calibrate off of. And like, thank you for just being able to find the best ways to articulate the ESTJ personality. Like you're able to like over time, like refine your understanding and become even better at type. And it gets better and better with every explanation. And I'm like really grateful to hear all of your beautiful thoughts on the type.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for coming on. Thank you for being a part of this thing called type. And I appreciate you audience members for watching this far. I'll see you guys all in the next episode. Bye, y'all.